A policewoman on leave thought she'd left danger behind when she moved to a quiet cabin in Montana. But one freezing night, as the snow howled outside, she opened her door to find a wounded German shepherd, his fur scorched, his eyes pleading for help. She didn't know that saving him would lead her deep into the woods, to a chained old man, a burned secret, and a hidden truth connecting to her own lost family. What she uncovered that night would rewrite everything she believed about fate, love, and second chances. What happened next will warm your heart and make you believe in destiny again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The wind swept over Silver Creek, Montana, with the hollow voice of winter. Snow fell in wide, drifting sheets, cloaking the pine-covered valley and the frozen roofs of the mountain town. The world seemed paused, breathless, silver, and still, except for the whisper of wind brushing against the glass of a lone cabin perched at the forest's edge. Inside that cabin sat Rachel Morgan, 35, her face illuminated by the glow of a flickering fire. She had once been a police officer in Billings, a woman with sharp instincts, steady hands, and a reputation for courage. But now her uniform lay folded in a box near the door, alongside a badge she couldn't bear to look at. Her auburn hair was tied loosely, strands falling across eyes that had once been fierce but were now tired, ringed with the faint shadows of sleepless nights. Rachel had served nearly a decade in law enforcement, 5 of those years on the K-9 unit. Her partner, Duke, a sable German shepherd, had been more than a dog. He'd been her anchor, her reason to stay steady through the chaos of the job. When Duke died in an explosion during a raid 6 months ago, a blast that also claimed her fellow officer, Rachel blamed herself. The guilt had driven her to isolation, far from the city, far from the reminders of everything she'd lost. Her father's old cabin in Silver Creek became her refuge, a wooden shell buried beneath pines and silence. Tonight, that silence pressed close, almost suffocating, as she sat by the window watching the snow build higher against the porch. The storm had been relentless for hours. A sound broke through. Faint, uneven, almost swallowed by the wind. A whine. Then a scratch. Rachel froze, instinct rising before thought. She moved toward the door quietly, her pulse quickening. Grabbing the flashlight from the table, she pulled her father's old revolver from the drawer. Habit, not fear. The scratching came again, louder this time, followed by a weak bark. When she cracked open the door, a gust of snow-laden wind blasted her face. For a moment she saw nothing but white. Then the beam of her flashlight found it. A German shepherd lay collapsed on the porch, his coat matted with blood and ice. He was large, easily 90 pounds, with thick black and tan fur now clumped from the cold. His chest rose and fell shallowly. One paw was twisted unnaturally, the other smeared with a dark stain that spread into the snow. Rachel's breath caught. She knelt beside him, brushing snow from his face. His eyes opened, pale amber, intelligent, desperate. "Hey there," she whispered, voice trembling. "You're okay now." The dog whimpered softly, trying to lift his head but failing. A leather collar encircled his neck, cracked and half frozen, with faint letters she could barely make out through the grime. Rex. And below it, an engraving almost rubbed away. A fragment of a police badge symbol, scratched out. Violently, something stirred deep inside Rachel. Recognition, disbelief, grief twisted into déjà vu. She felt her chest tighten as she ran her hand along his muzzle. "You were one of ours, weren't you?" she murmured. Training kicked in. She dragged him inside, shutting the door against the storm. The cabin filled with the faint sounds of her movements, boots scraping the floor, water boiling on the stove, the soft rhythm of her breathing growing steadier. She laid Rex on a blanket near the fireplace and set to work, cutting away the frozen fur, disinfecting the wounds with trembling precision. Beneath the grime, she saw burns along his flank and deep lacerations that didn't look like animal attacks. too clean, too deliberate. "Someone did this to you," she whispered, her voice hardening. Rex didn't resist her touch. He watched her every move with quiet understanding, his gaze following her as she stitched, wrapped, and spoke softly to keep herself calm. When it was done, she slid a bowl of warm water near him, added pieces of soft bread, and sat back against the wall. The firelight flickered across both their faces, one human, one canine, each scarred in their own way. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, time slowed. Far away in town, the neon sign of Silver Creek Sheriff's Department glowed dimly through the falling snow. Inside, Deputy Eli Hawthorne leaned over a cluttered desk, phone pressed to his ear. Eli was in his late 30s, tall, built like someone who'd once been an athlete and still carried that quiet discipline. His sandy blonde hair was trimmed short, and his blue eyes had the weary alertness of someone who'd seen too much but refused to give up. He'd served with Rachel years ago, had been her partner on patrol before she joined the K-9 division. He'd watched her withdraw after Duke's death, offering help she never accepted. Now, months later, he still checked on her, indirectly, through mutual contacts, though she probably didn't know. Tonight, Eli's desk was littered with case files. A missing person report lay on top. Harold Lane, age 58, former owner of the Silver Creek Mining Company. The man had been missing for 2 weeks. His last known location, somewhere near the forest roads beyond Rachel's cabin. "Yeah, I've sent a patrol up the North Ridge," Eli said into the phone. "But the storm's too bad. We'll try again tomorrow." When he hung up, his gaze lingered on the snow hammering against the window. Something about the Lane case didn't sit right. The man had powerful enemies, and whispers around town said he'd hidden something valuable before disappearing, something people might kill for. He reached for his jacket, debating whether to drive out toward the ridge, when the lights flickered and went out. The storm had cut the power. Eli sighed and lit a lantern, muttering, "Guess it's another long night in Silver Creek." Back in the cabin, Rachel fed the fire another log. She could hear the wind gnawing at the walls, but inside the air had grown warmer, gentler. Rex stirred, shifting slightly, his body relaxing for the first time. When Rachel leaned closer, she saw his eyes on her, not fearful, but searching. "You're safe here," she said softly, brushing his fur. "Whatever happened out there, it's over now." But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed her own words. The snow beat harder on the roof, like soft knocking from an unseen world. Rachel sat on the rug, staring into the flames, memories flickering through her mind. The explosion, Duke's final bark, the smell of smoke. She clenched her jaw, pushing it away. Beside her, Rex let out a low sigh, his head resting near her boot. And something unexpected happened. The tension in her chest, the coiled dread that had haunted her every night, began to ease. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive. When she finally drifted into sleep, her head slumped against the arm of the couch, the firelight painting soft shadows on her face. Rex shifted closer, curling beside her like a sentinel. For the first time in months, Rachel Morgan slept through the night without waking from a nightmare. By dawn, the storm had not yet passed. The world outside was blanketed in white silence, a cathedral of snow and light. Rachel woke to find Rex standing by the window, his posture alert. His fur caught the golden slivers of morning light filtering through the frost. When she followed his gaze, she saw his ears twitching, fixated on the forest beyond the ridge. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stared, muscles tensed, as if remembering something buried deep in the woods. Rachel poured herself coffee, watching him. Something told her this dog hadn't just wandered here by chance. Outside, beyond the frozen trees, secrets waited, and both of them, the wounded cop and the wounded dog, were about to be drawn into something far larger than either of them could imagine. By morning, the storm had softened to a whisper. The world outside Rachel's cabin looked untouched, a white ocean of silence stretching beneath the pale gold of early light. The snow clung to the pine branches like frozen lace, and every sound, the groan of the wood, the creak of her boots, seemed too loud for such stillness. Rex stood by the window, his body rigid, one paw slightly lifted, tail straight as a line. His ears flicked forward, his amber eyes fixed on something beyond the frost. He let out a low growl, deep, restrained, the kind of warning that spoke of more than instinct. Rachel sipped the bitter coffee she'd brewed on the stove and followed his gaze. Nothing moved out there. Just trees, endless trees. But she trusted dogs more than silence. She set down her cup, grabbed her jacket, and opened the cabin door. The cold hit like a wall, the air sharp and clean enough to sting her lungs. Rex bounded outside despite his healing wounds, nose to the ground, moving with the deliberate focus of a trained K9. Rachel zipped up her coat and followed, her boots crunching over the crusted snow. At first, all she saw were the prints of deer and small forest creatures. Then, near the edge of the tree line, something else appeared. Human tracks. Deep, uneven, half filled with new snow, leading from the ridge and disappearing into the forest. A few feet away lay the faint trail of tire marks. Half buried, the rubber tread burned into the frozen ground before vanishing under drifts. Someone had been here recently. Rachel crouched, brushing snow from the impressions, noting the pattern automatically. She muttered to herself, "All-terrain, heavy tread, maybe a pickup truck." Her old instincts hummed to life. Whoever had come through hadn't done it days ago. The snow hadn't had time to bury the tracks completely. Rex barked once, sharp and certain. His tail swayed in short, tense arcs as he sniffed the air, turning toward the forest. "All right," Rachel murmured, standing. "Show me." She went back inside briefly, strapping on her old duty belt, sidearm holster, flashlight, radio she wasn't even sure still worked, and her small first aid kit. The badge remained on the table, untouched, but her posture had changed. The officer in her had surfaced again, the one who made decisions without hesitation. As she pulled on her gloves, she glanced at Rex. The dog's wounds had scabbed over, his limp almost gone. His fur caught the morning light in shades of copper and smoke, his breath puffing in small clouds. He looked back at her, ready, waiting. "Let's go, partner," she said quietly. They crossed the property line and entered the woods. In Silver Creek Town, Deputy Eli Hawthorne rubbed sleep from his eyes as he pulled his patrol truck onto the canyon road. The previous night had brought more than snow. It had brought trouble. Around dawn, a snowplow driver had reported a burned-out pickup off Highway 17, halfway down a ravine. When Eli arrived, the sight stopped him cold. The vehicle was little more than a blackened skeleton, still smoking faintly. Through the soot and melted glass, he could just make out the faint lettering on the tailgate, Lane Mining Co. He crouched beside the wreck, running a gloved hand over the twisted metal. The fire had been deliberate. Accelerant residue clung to the snow nearby. No body, though. Either the driver escaped, or someone made sure he disappeared elsewhere. Behind him, a voice called out, "You really think that's Harold Lane's truck?" It belonged to Sergeant Tom Duffy, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a kind face and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been on the force longer than Eli had been alive, known for his calm patience and his stubborn refusal to retire. He joined Eli at the edge of the wreck, his breath visible in the cold air. "Plates match," Eli said. "Registered to the mining company." Duffy frowned. So, either the old man burned his own truck to fake his death, or someone else wanted it to look that way. Eli nodded slowly. "And I think whoever did this isn't far." He stood, scanning the snow-covered ridge stretching toward the northern forest, the same direction Rachel's cabin lay hidden. Rachel moved through that very forest, the crunch of her boots swallowed by the thick snow. Rex stayed a few paces ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was following. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. After an hour, she saw it, a pine tree marked with 3 deep slashes, carved deliberately with a knife. They were parallel, precise, too intentional to be animal damage. Rachel felt a jolt of recognition. It was a K9 search pattern mark, one she'd used herself in field training, 3 parallel cuts to signal direction. She knelt to examine it, her gloved fingers brushing the grooves. "You've seen this before, haven't you, boy?" she whispered. Rex barked softly in reply, tail low but wagging once, as if confirming. The forest thickened around them, sunlight struggling through the canopy. They moved deeper until the scent of smoke and iron drifted faintly through the air. Rachel's pulse quickened. She motioned for Rex to stay close. Soon they stumbled upon a small clearing. At its center lay the remains of a makeshift camp, a torn tent half buried in snow, a rusted camping stove overturned, a sleeping bag frozen stiff. A smear of dried blood darkened the ground nearby, leading toward the trees. Rachel crouched, scanning every detail. "Not long ago," she murmured. "Maybe 2, 3 days." Rex whined, sniffing the air around the blood trail, then pawed at something near the tent. Rachel brushed away snow and found a journal, its cover soaked and edges frozen solid. The first few pages were ruined, but near the middle, faded words bled through the paper. They said the claim was lost, but he lied. "I can't let him find me before I reach the cabin. If I don't make it, someone has to know the truth." Rachel's brow furrowed. Cabin, truth, claim. She looked at Rex, who tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. The wind picked up, carrying a faint echo through the pines, like footsteps, far away but approaching. Rachel slipped the journal into her coat and pressed a hand to Rex's collar. "Quiet," she whispered. Together they moved behind the fallen log at the edge of the clearing. A figure appeared through the trees, a man bundled in a dark parka and fur-lined hat, moving with the heavy gait of someone used to the cold. He was tall, stocky, his face hidden behind a scarf and goggles. He paused at the ruined tent, crouched, and touched the bloodstain. Rachel's breath froze in her chest. Whoever he was, he knew this place. Rex stiffened beside her, a low growl rising in his throat. Rachel placed a steadying hand on his neck, waiting, listening. The man muttered something under his breath, then stood and turned, heading deeper into the forest, the same direction the blood trail led. When his silhouette vanished among the trees, Rachel finally exhaled. She rose from her hiding spot and whispered, "We're not alone out here." Rex barked once, low and sharp, and began following the faint scent trail the man had left behind. Rachel hesitated, glancing at the sky. Snow clouds were gathering again. Another storm was building, thick and fast. But her gut told her this wasn't just about lost hikers or hunters. The tracks, the camp, the journal, it was connected to something bigger. And now someone else was moving through the woods with purpose. She adjusted the strap of her pack, checked the safety on her gun, and nodded to Rex. "Lead the way." Together they stepped beyond the clearing, into the deep green silence of the pines. Behind them, the marked tree stood like a sentry in the snow, its 3 carved lines catching the faint light, pointing them toward the next secret waiting in the frozen heart of Silver Creek. The air grew thinner as Rachel and Rex climbed deeper into the forest. The trees thickened, their trunks rising like pillars into a gray sky. Snow fell again, soft at first, then heavier, swirling between branches like drifting ash. Rachel's breath came out in short, visible bursts, her scarf damp with condensation. She adjusted the strap on her rifle and glanced at Rex, who moved ahead with a sharp, purposeful stride. The dog's fur bristled every time a branch cracked or the wind shifted, his instincts sharpening with each passing minute. They followed the faint trail of the man from earlier, now nearly erased by new snow. The scent must have been faint, but Rex never hesitated. Rachel trusted that nose more than any compass. The woods seemed endless until, through the veil of snowfall, a shape appeared, a shadow of geometry amid the wild. It was a cabin, hunched and skeletal beneath a thick crust of snow. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. though the faint scent of burnt wood still lingered in the air. Rachel halted near the tree line, scanning the structure. The windows were frosted over, one of them cracked. The porch sagged beneath years of neglect. A single lantern hung by the door, swinging faintly with the wind. "What are we looking at, Rex?" she whispered. The dog sniffed the air, gave a low growl, then padded forward. Approaching the door, Rachel noticed faint drag marks in the snow, human, not animal, and dark flecks that had frozen into crimson beads. Her pulse picked up. She drew her sidearm, nudging the door open with the barrel. The hinges let out a groan like a dying thing. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of rot, damp wood, and something metallic. Blood. Dust motes floated in the weak light filtering through a cracked window. The cabin had 2 rooms, a small living area with an old wood stove, and a back room where the air seemed colder, emptier. Rex pushed ahead, his paws silent against the floorboards. Then Rachel saw it. In the back room, on a rusted bed frame, lay a man, gaunt, pale, his wrists bound to the headboard with thick leather straps. His clothes were in tatters, his face hollowed by fever and starvation. A long gray beard clung to his jaw, and his hair was matted against the pillow. When he turned his head, his eyes flickered open, cloudy blue, rimmed with exhaustion yet still carrying an ember of awareness. Rachel froze. "Sir?" His cracked lips parted. The sound that came out was barely more than a whisper. "Help. Please." Rachel holstered her gun and rushed forward. "Easy, I've got you," she murmured, cutting the restraints with her knife. The man flinched at the motion, as if expecting pain, then went still when he realized she meant no harm. "My name's Rachel Morgan," she said softly. "You're safe now. Who did this to you?" The man swallowed hard, his throat working painfully. "Name's Arthur. Arthur Lane." Rachel's breath caught. The name. She'd heard it from Eli before. "You're Harold Lane's father," she said slowly. He nodded faintly, then shivered. "Don't trust him," he rasped. "He sold his soul. For gold." Before she could ask more, his eyes rolled back, his body sagging. Rachel checked his pulse. It was there, but faint. "Hang on, Mr. Lane," she whispered. She grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair, covering him as Rex hovered close, whining softly. She looked around the room, searching for supplies. A few empty cans, an overturned lamp, a cracked pitcher of frozen water. Near the corner of the room sat a small iron safe, the door pried open, its edges warped from a crowbar. Inside, only scraps of paper remained, burned corners, torn fragments, and one note still intact enough to read. Proof. Keep hidden from Harold. Rachel's brow furrowed. Whatever Arthur had kept here, Harold wanted badly enough to imprison his own father. Miles away, in Silver Creek, Deputy Eli Hawthorne sat in his truck parked outside the small brick building of First Northern Bank. Inside, the manager, a nervous man named Calvin Reese, mid-40s, balding, polite but guarded, handed Eli a printout of recent transactions. "Mr. Lane's accounts were active until 2 weeks ago," Calvin said. "Then suddenly, large withdrawals. All of it transferred to an offshore account. He said it was for a business merger, but—" He hesitated, glancing around the small office. Between us, Harold seemed frightened, paranoid. Said he needed cash fast. Eli frowned. Did he mention where he was going? Not directly, but his last call came from the ridge cell tower before the blizzard hit. After that, nothing. That ridge was near Rachel's cabin. A cold unease settled over Eli's gut. He thanked Calvin and stepped out into the parking lot, his breath steaming in the air. He radioed the sheriff's office, his voice tight. "This is Hawthorne. I think Harold Lane's disappearance isn't voluntary. I'm heading north toward the ridge." The dispatcher crackled back. "Careful, Eli. Weather's rolling in again." "Yeah," he muttered, glancing toward the clouded mountains. "I've got a feeling I'm already late." Back in the forest, Rachel had managed to build a small fire inside the cabin's wood stove. The warmth barely cut through the chill. Arthur stirred beneath the blanket, his eyes fluttering open. "You shouldn't be here," he croaked. "I'm not leaving you," she replied firmly. "Who did this?" Arthur's gaze drifted toward the window. "My son, Harold. Thought he could buy peace with blood. Said the mines still had gold, hidden veins beneath the old shafts. But it wasn't gold he found. It was ruin." His voice faltered into a coughing fit, and Rachel steadied him, giving him a sip of melted snow water. "Why keep you here?" she asked quietly. Arthur managed a broken laugh. "Because I wouldn't give him what he wanted. The proof. Documents. Deeds. Something he needed to claim it all." Rachel thought of the note inside the safe. Proof, hidden from Harold. Before she could press further, Rex's ears shot up. He moved toward the window, his muscles taut, a growl rumbling in his chest. Rachel instinctively doused the lantern, plunging the cabin into dimness. Only the embers in the stove glowed faintly red. She crouched beside the bed, whispering, "Stay quiet." Outside, snow crunched beneath heavy boots. Through a narrow slit in the curtain, Rachel saw a man in a dark leather coat, his shoulders broad, his face hidden beneath a fur-lined hood. A hunting rifle hung over his shoulder. He circled the cabin slowly, scanning the tree line before moving toward the front porch. Rachel's pulse hammered. She slid her pistol from its holster, motioning for Rex to stay low. The dog obeyed, but his body quivered with restrained energy. The man's steps creaked on the porch boards. He paused at the door. Rachel held her breath, finger near the trigger but steady. Then, 3 slow knocks. The sound echoed through the cabin, dull and deliberate. Arthur's lips moved silently. "Don't answer." Rachel stayed frozen, listening as the man lingered for a moment, then stepped away. Snow crunched again, retreating footsteps. After a long minute, the sound faded completely. Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned back to Arthur, but his eyes were already closed again, exhaustion overtaking him. She pulled the blanket higher over his chest and whispered, "You're safe for now." But she knew better. Whoever that man was, he would be back. And he wasn't here by coincidence. Rex came to her side, pressing against her leg. His amber eyes met hers, and in that look, Rachel saw the same resolve she felt inside. Whatever secrets this forest held, they were no longer buried. And now, she wasn't just a bystander. She was part of it. The wind had turned cruel again by nightfall. Snow whipped across the clearing like white fire, the world beyond the cabin dissolving into a storm of light and shadow. Rachel sat near the bed where Arthur Lane lay sleeping, his breathing shallow but steadier than before. The fire in the stove burned low, throwing faint orange onto the wooden walls. Rex rested by the door, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the frosted glass. Something in the air had changed. Rachel could feel it too. She rose, tightening the blanket over Arthur's frail form. His hand twitched, his voice breaking the silence. "He's coming," he murmured, half-conscious. "He won't let it end. Not without the proof." Rachel froze. "Who?" Arthur's eyes fluttered open, wild and glassy. "My son, Harold. The Gold's cursed child. Don't—" His words collapsed into a cough. Before Rachel could reply, Rex growled, a deep guttural sound that rose from his chest. The hair along his spine bristled as he turned toward the window. Rachel grabbed her pistol, doused the lantern, and crouched beside the window frame. Through the blizzard's veil, a figure emerged from the tree line. The man's silhouette was unmistakable, broad shoulders under a dark coat, rifle slung low, moving with heavy determination. His boots crunched over the snow with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the land beneath him. Harold Lane. He looked older than the photograph Rachel had seen in the sheriff's file, perhaps early 60s now, but harder, as if greed itself had carved him into shape. His hair, once dark, was streaked with white, his face gaunt yet sharp, eyes bright with manic purpose. The storm's reflection gave him a spectral glow. He carried himself like a man who'd already bargained away his soul. Rachel steadied her breathing, whispering to Rex, "Stay low." Harold stepped onto the porch and pushed open the door with one gloved hand. The wind followed him inside, carrying flakes that melted against the fire's last embers. He scanned the room, his gaze catching on the half-burned safe, the disturbed snow prints on the floor. His voice came out low, rasping. "I know someone's here. Whoever you are, you've made a mistake stepping into my business." Rachel stayed hidden, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Harold moved deeper into the room, boot heels tapping the boards. "You think you can hide him from me? My father's a fool, but even he couldn't bury the truth forever." When he reached for the blanket on the bed, Rachel stood. "Step away from him!" Harold turned sharply. For a heartbeat, disbelief flickered across his features, then rage. "A cop?" he sneered. "I thought they'd sent you people away." "Rachel Morgan," she said evenly. "You're under arrest for assault and unlawful imprisonment." He laughed, cold and hollow. "You've no idea what's at stake here. Everything in this land, this mine, was mine before he stole it." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Your father nearly died because of you." "That old man was weak," Harold spat. "He hid something worth millions. Proof the mine was still producing, hidden contracts, claim papers. He would have given it all to her instead." Rachel hesitated. "Her?" He smirked. "Margaret. You know the name, don't you? The woman who ruined everything." The air shifted. Rachel's grip faltered. "My mother's name was Margaret." Harold's eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. "Then you should know you're standing in the ruins of your own bloodline's mess." Before she could react, Harold pulled a flare from his pocket and struck it against the stove. The sudden light flared crimson, casting wild shadows across the cabin. "If I can't have what's mine, no one will," he hissed, hurling the flare onto the woodpile. The fire caught instantly, greedily consuming dry timber and curtains. Rachel fired once, a warning shot that split the air. "Stop!" Harold ducked, firing back blindly. The bullet shattered a window. Rex lunged forward with a snarl, teeth bared, leaping toward Harold as flames licked up the walls. The two collided near the door, man and dog rolling into the snow outside. Rachel rushed after them, coughing from smoke, eyes watering. Outside, the storm had grown into a full whiteout. Firelight pulsed through the blowing snow, orange against the night. Harold swung the butt of his rifle at Rex, striking his shoulder, but the dog refused to retreat. He lunged again, clamping down on Harold's arm. Harold screamed, falling backward, his rifle tumbling away. Rachel aimed her pistol, her voice cutting through the storm. "It's over, Harold!" He twisted, trying to grab the rifle, but Rex's jaws tightened. Blood darkened the snow beneath them. Finally, Rachel fired another shot, this time into the air. The sound echoed like thunder. Harold froze, panting, defeated. For a long moment, only the fire's roar filled the silence. Then, from the cabin, came the groaning collapse of beams. The roof had begun to cave in. Rachel's instincts screamed at her to run. She dragged Harold away from the flames, shouting for Rex to follow. When she turned back, the doorway was engulfed, sparks bursting into the wind like fireflies. Inside, Arthur still lay on the floor. Rachel didn't hesitate. She dropped the gun, covering her mouth with her sleeve, and charged back inside. The heat was blinding, the smoke thick. She found Arthur near the bed, half conscious, his hand reaching weakly toward her. "Come on." "I've got you," she gasped, hoisting him up. The floor creaked beneath her boots, flames climbing the walls. Rex darted in beside her, barking frantically. Together, they stumbled out just as the cabin's roof gave way behind them. They collapsed in the snow, coughing, gasping, the cold biting against their scorched skin. Rachel turned to see the cabin fully ablaze, flames clawing toward the sky, orange against the endless white. Arthur's eyes fluttered open. He reached for Rachel's wrist, voice trembling. "There's a box under the old floorboards. The thing he wanted." Rachel squeezed his hand. "It's gone, Arthur. It's all gone." But his cracked lips curved into a faint smile. "Not all. The fire purifies. Sometimes what's lost finds its way back." His grip loosened, and he drifted into unconsciousness again. Rachel looked up through the smoke. In the distance, faint red lights blinked through the blizzard. Rescue vehicles. Someone had found them. Eli's voice came through the radio first, distorted by static. "Rachel, do you copy?" She fumbled for her mic. "I'm here. Cabin's down. 3 survivors, 1 suspect in custody." "Hold on," Eli said. "We're almost there." Minutes later, the first rescue truck broke through the tree line, headlights slicing through the snow. Eli jumped out, his face pale with worry but alive with relief. He wore his heavy sheriff's parka, dusted with snow, and his gloved hand reached for hers the moment he saw her. "You're lucky you still have eyebrows," he joked hoarsely, though his eyes glistened. Rachel let out a shaky laugh. "Don't make me smile right now, Hawthorne." Behind them, 2 rescue workers lifted Arthur onto a stretcher. Rex stayed beside him, tail lowered, eyes tracking every move protectively. As the fire finally began to die under the weight of falling snow, one of the rescuers called out, "Chief, you'll want to see this." Eli and Rachel turned. From the smoldering ruins, a firefighter held up a charred wooden box, its hinges melted but still intact. Inside lay blackened papers, and between them a folded letter, edges singed but legible. Rachel reached for it, hands trembling as she opened it carefully. The ink had bled, but 2 names were still visible, Arthur Lane and Margaret Morgan. Beneath them, written in faded blue ink, a line that made her throat tighten. "For the one who finds truth in ashes, our love remains." Rachel stared at the words as the snow fell softly over the ruins. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The fire had taken much, but it had given her something she hadn't known she was missing, the bridge between her past and this moment. Rex pressed his head against her arm, his fur warm despite the storm. Eli placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Somewhere behind them, the last of the cabin collapsed with a final sigh, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like dying stars. Morning broke gently over Silver Creek. The storm that had once devoured the valley had passed, leaving the world clean and glistening under a new sun. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the small mountain town, the scent of pine wood and thawing earth drifting in the air. The cabin that had once been a ruin of fire now stood rebuilt, its walls smelling of new timber and fresh paint. It wasn't grand, but it was alive, the kind of place where warmth lingered longer than sound. Rachel Morgan stood by the window, the same window that had once been cracked by bullets and ice, and watched the day stretch across the hills. She was no longer the woman who had arrived months ago, haunted and running from ghosts. Her auburn hair, now tied in a neat braid, caught the light like copper. The faint scar on her temple, left from that night, had softened with time. But her eyes were clearer now, steady, as if the fire had burned away everything that didn't belong. Behind her, the steady sound of a hammer echoed. Eli Hawthorne worked outside, his coat tossed over a railing, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The Montana sun had returned the color to his skin and ease to his shoulders. He was still tall, still careful in every movement, but there was something gentler in him now, a man who had finally stopped carrying the world on his back. And near the porch, chasing a stray bird across the field, was Rex, his black and tan coat gleaming, the fur along his neck thick and healthy again. A faint scar traced his right shoulder, but he ran without pain, tongue lolling, joy spilling from every bound. Inside, sitting in the old wooden chair near the fireplace, was Arthur Lane. The months of recovery had aged him further, yet his face had softened. His once frail hands now held a mug of tea, trembling only slightly. His blue eyes, still sharp beneath heavy brows, followed Rachel as she moved about the room. "You rebuilt it well," he said, his voice rasping but calm. Rachel turned and smiled. "It's not perfect, but it stands. That's more than I could say a few months ago." Arthur nodded, then looked toward the window where Rex barked happily at Eli. "That dog saved my life. And yours. Remarkable creature." Rachel's expression softened. "He's more than that." She walked to a low shelf where a leather-bound folder lay. Inside were official papers, the kind stamped, signed, and sealed with government ink. She took one out and handed it to Arthur. The department confirmed it this morning. Rex was a K-9 from the Silver Creek unit, missing in action after the mining camp explosion last winter, the one Harold started. Arthur's gaze dimmed with regret. My son's sins run deep. I thought greed would die with the cold, but I was wrong. Rachel shook her head gently. You're not responsible for his choices, Arthur. You survived what he tried to destroy. That means something. He sighed, his fingers tracing the paper absently. Margaret would have said the same thing. She always believed in forgiveness, even when I didn't deserve it. Rachel turned away slightly, swallowing hard. You loved her. I did, Arthur said quietly. But her father forbade it. He thought I wasn't good enough for her, a miner's son with no future. So she left town before I could stop her. I never knew she'd had a child. If I had... His voice faltered, and his eyes shone with something fragile. Perhaps we could have been a family. Rachel stood still, letting the weight of his words settle. She never spoke about it, only said she left someone behind she wished she hadn't. Arthur smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Then perhaps, through you, she found her way back. Outside, Eli's laughter drifted through the open door. Rachel, you gonna help or just watch me freeze my hands off? Rachel stepped out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're the one who insisted on rebuilding the fence in April, Hawthorne. The ground's still half frozen. Eli grinned, leaning on the hammer. Yeah, well, I like a challenge. You like showing off, she shot back. He shrugged. That too. For a moment the air between them softened, filled with that unspoken warmth that had grown quietly since the night of the fire. Eli had been there when she woke in the hospital, covered in ash, barely breathing, but alive. He'd sat by her bedside every day after, joking, arguing, waiting for her to heal. When the sheriff's office offered him a promotion to deputy chief in Billings, he'd surprised everyone by turning it down. I've had enough chasing ghosts, he'd told her. I'd rather build something real. So they had. Together. By the fence line, a wooden sign now stood, freshly carved and painted in deep silver letters. Silver Paw Sanctuary. Rescue, train, protect. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. Rachel walked toward Rex, who bounded over, tail wagging furiously. You know this place is yours too, right? She said, kneeling beside him. He licked her face once, a soft, grateful gesture that said everything words couldn't. A small truck pulled up the dirt path, its tires kicking up melting snow. The driver, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and freckles scattered across her cheeks, stepped out carrying a leash and a trembling golden retriever wrapped in a blanket. Are you Officer Morgan? She asked, her breath visible in the chill. Just Rachel now, she replied, smiling. You can call me that. The woman introduced herself as Helen Clark, a local veterinarian who volunteered with rescues across the county. She had a practical kindness about her, the kind that came from years of patching broken paws and broken hearts alike. This little one was found near the highway, Helen said softly, kneeling. Probably dumped. He's skittish but sweet. Rachel reached out, letting the golden sniff her hand. He'll be safe here. As Helen smiled, Eli joined them, his breath forming white clouds in the air. Another recruit for the team, he said. Looks like it, Rachel replied. We'll name him Sonny. He deserves something bright. The dog wagged his tail weakly, as if he understood. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the hills, Rachel sat on the porch steps with Arthur and Eli. The world around them was quiet, the kind of peace that feels earned. The last of the snow melted in soft rivulets down the mountain, revealing the first shoots of wild grass. Birds returned, and the air smelled of thawing soil and pine. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his voice low but steady. You know, when you get old, you start to think peace is a myth. But then you see something like this, and you realize maybe it was just waiting for you to stop running. Eli nodded. Guess we all had to walk through the storm to find home. Rachel smiled faintly, looking out at the horizon. Sometimes home isn't where you were born. It's where you stop fighting. The sun sank behind the ridge, painting the snow in gold. Rex lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, watching the light fade. Arthur looked at them, the woman who'd saved him, the man who'd risked his life, and the dog who'd found them both, and felt something like peace settle in his bones. When the last light dipped below the hills, Rachel rose and brushed her hands together. "Come on, partner," she said to Rex. "Time to go in." Rex lifted his head, tail wagging softly. He barked once as if answering. Rachel smiled, her voice warm as the setting sun. "We found each other in the storm, Rex, and that's all that matters." The hills of Silver Creek held the echo of her words, carried them through the pines and over the river, soft, steady, eternal.